Welcome to the Cheating Secrets channel. We hope you enjoy today's story.
I'm Brent Willis. At 29, I had a serious problem, a cheating wife. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, let me clarify. I have never been strong in English, literature, or social sciences. I am a mathematician, economist, businessman. Do not be offended by my inability to use flowery language or give tantalizing descriptions of people or events, because I am one who speaks only facts. In addition to what I described in the previous paragraph, I feel that I need to honestly tell you about my strengths and weaknesses, without false modesty about my strengths and without downplaying or embellishing my weaknesses. I am very good looking, successful in business, trustworthy, treat everyone with respect regardless of their position in society, and have almost always been honest. I am a very attentive lover and prioritize my partner's satisfaction above my own. I am gentle during lovemaking. 6 out of 7 women I have had sexual relations with have always told me this, and I believe it is a real plus. I left them quite satisfied after each encounter. For one woman who really liked roughness, I was a big disappointment. Additionally, perhaps due to some of the aforementioned characteristics, the parents of all the women I dated seemed to like me. Sometimes I think mothers like me more than their daughters, haha. As for my negatives, I am hopelessly unathletic and not very resilient. I am easily hurt by negative comments or actions from others. I have a delicate nature, and I often hide my emotions. Despite average physical strength and agility, I avoid physical confrontation and lack aggression in any sphere of life except business and investing. Despite my lack of aggressiveness, I am truly vengeful towards people who wrong me, and if I am not in physical danger, I seek revenge. The details of my interactions with the two main heroines of this story, Melissa Thompson and Doreen Bronson, in the distant past would not contribute to this story and would bore you, so I will tell it quickly and simply. I dated Melissa in college when I was in my final year, but we broke up shortly before summer. It was tough for me, but not devastating, as it was mostly mutual. She was more inclined towards commitment than I was, but never hid that from me or deceived me. I met Doreen during the summer after completing my first year. Melissa, Doreen, and I attended different high schools in the same area, and we all went to the nearest major state university. I dated Doreen exclusively during the summers and halfway through senior year when Melissa reappeared on the scene. I dated both of them. I didn't hide it from either of them, until graduation when both gave me the ultimatum to fish or cut bait. It was a tough choice. Both were beautiful and sexy, but Melissa, slightly more so. It seemed both were truly in love with me, but Doreen, slightly more. Both were intelligent and came from good families, though it didn't matter much. Melissa's family was extremely wealthy, while Doreen's belonged to the upper middle class. Sex with both was great, but perhaps with Melissa, it brought me more satisfaction, though from Melissa's perspective, sex was rated 9 out of 10. Whereas from Doreen's point of view, it was 10. Doreen was always upfront about everything. Melissa was significantly less forthcoming, though I never caught her in a lie. I chose Melissa. Doreen was crushed and didn't even attend the graduation ceremony, and I heard from friends that she moved out of the area shortly after graduation. I also met Doreen's parents, Tom and Lydia Bronson, after breaking up with her, as we had a good relationship. They understood how sincere my attachment to Doreen was and how difficult this decision was for me, and we parted on good terms. Melissa and I got married 6 months after graduation and lived in the same capital district where we grew up, in an apartment bought by her parents, Jack and Carolyn Thompson, as a wedding gift. Melissa's parents really liked me, even more than the parents of most other women I dated. Melissa's mother, Carolyn, always warmly welcomed me and boasted about me to her friends. Jack, Melissa's father, not only liked me but was also very impressed with my business acumen. He wanted me to join one of his companies, but I told him I wanted to keep my business life separate from his and go my own way. I never wanted anyone to assume that I got promoted or assigned duties just because I was a son-in-law. Although I never worked for him, after 2 years of marriage to his daughter, Jack insisted I be named trustee of Melissa's trust fund. Somewhere around $15 million, because she had absolutely no business sense. The trust fund money was supposed to transfer to her once she turned 30, but I was in charge of every part of it, except for some preferred shares in one of Jack's companies worth about $3 million, which couldn't be touched until Melissa turned 32, and even then, there were restrictions. Married life benefited me, despite learning something about Melissa that I never noticed during our courtship. which is not surprising considering my lack of insight. She was more materialistic and cared much more about her status in society than I assumed before marriage. Actually, how rich, successful, and high society people treated her in our metropolis was one of the most important things in her life. Despite revelations about Melissa that caused some concern, I was happy in our marriage. Melissa seemed to be there for me when I needed her. For example, she vigilantly supported me when my parents, my only relatives I cared about, died in a car accident 3 years into our marriage. The money I received from my parents' inheritance, after taxes and expenses, I deposited into an offshore account. I never told Melissa about it, and she never asked. We didn't need the money to lead the lifestyle we wanted, but it was a significant amount, around $1 million. I intended to tell her about transferring it to an offshore account, but I never mustered the courage. Maybe for some Freudian reason I didn't do it, I really don't know. When Melissa and I turned 29, our birthdays were only 3 days apart. We decided that she would stop taking birth control pills, and we would start a family, something we had always agreed upon since we got engaged. Even with my usual lack of attentiveness, it seemed to me that when she stopped taking the pills, her libido increased. Her libido had always been what I considered normal, given my experience with 6 other women I had sexual relationships with before marriage, so we usually had very good sex 3 to 4 times a week. After she stopped taking the pills, it seemed like she became more sexually aggressive and energetic during sex, and the frequency of our encounters increased to 5 or 6 times a week. Despite her stopping the pills, she didn't get pregnant right away. We both understood that it would likely take a couple of months before she got pregnant, so it didn't scare either of us. As I mentioned earlier, I treat everyone with respect, which made me popular among the staff of the country club to which Melissa, Jack, Carolyn, and I belonged. Actually, I didn't often play golf or tennis because I simply lacked the necessary hand-eye coordination, but I enjoyed having lunch there, swimming, and playing cards. Some staff members liked and trusted me so much that they came to me with business problems, and I always did my best to help them. Perhaps the friendliest staff member I befriended was Jasper, the head waiter at the golf grill. One Saturday morning at the club, following our standard procedure, Melissa went for a golf lesson while I intended to swim and relax by the pool, as the work week had been particularly intense. I lingered, chatting with a few people, and as I approached the locker room, Jasper approached me with a very concerned look on his face. "Brent," he said, "I insisted that all the staff call me by my name, although Melissa wanted them to call her Mrs. Willis. Can I have a moment with you?" "Of course," I replied, expecting him to talk about some financial problems he was having. Jasper led me to a secluded corner. Tears welled up in his eyes, and when I asked in concern what happened, he blurted out, "I hate to tell you this, Brent, but your wife is cheating on you, right now as we speak." "What?" I asked in horror. I suspected it for 2 weeks, but today I confirmed it. "She's with Jeremy, the professional golfer's assistant, in massage room A. Apparently, the lock on the door is broken, but they don't know it. I accidentally opened the door and saw them, although they didn't see me. Go see for yourself right now." I'm sure the color drained from my face, and I nearly fell to my knees. I had to hold onto the back of the chair for a few seconds to regain my balance. Not being one for confrontation, I wouldn't challenge Melissa for anything if I caught them, but I had to know. I quickly made my way to massage room A, which had a sign on the door that read, "Do not disturb." I cracked it open. The lock didn't work, just as Jasper said. Melissa was on all fours on the massage table. She was moaning harder. Before closing the door, I noticed he was wearing a condom, but then my vision quickly blurred. Closing the door behind me, I collapsed to the floor. My head was in turmoil. To say I was devastated would be an understatement for the entire decade. Finally, I came to enough to realize I needed to get out of there. Hurrying out of the building, I passed Jasper and managed to say, "Thank you for telling me, but please, don't tell anyone else under any circumstances," before tears welled up in my eyes. Jasper replied with genuine concern in his voice, "I understand. I'm sorry. I was driving in the fog until I stumbled upon an open bar." It was a relatively upscale bar in a pleasant part of town. Actually, it was in the suburbs near where Doran's parents lived, next to several restaurants and clubs. I hardly ever drank hard liquor and rarely had more than 2 glasses of wine a day, if at all. I was completely drunk, sitting alone at a table in the corner of the bar. By the time I stumbled out of the bar, it was already dark, and I was completely drunk. My plan was to get into the car without fastening my seatbelt, crash into a brick wall, and die. Obviously, I didn't account for the airbag. The last thing I remember is falling. I only know what happened in the next 12 hours from other people's accounts. I woke up in an unfamiliar setting. It was like a guest room in a dormitory. I was dressed in the same clothes I left the country club in. My head was pounding, and overall, I felt terrible. Unfortunately, I hadn't forgotten the reason for my discomfort, so emotionally I felt worse than physically. I slowly exited the room I was in, found the bathroom, relieved myself, and looked in the mirror. I looked as bad as I felt, including a large bump and scratches on my head. I thought I recognized the corridor on the second floor where I was, but couldn't recall how I got there. I heard the sounds of cooking and people chatting downstairs, so I stumbled down the stairs. I was shocked to see Doran's parents, Tom and Lydia Bronson, in the kitchen. "Well, Brent, glad to see you're alive," said Tom, looking at me over his reading glasses and setting aside the newspaper. "Hi, Brent, breakfast will be ready soon," chirped Lydia, standing by the stove. "Tom, Lydia. I have no idea how I got here," I mumbled. "Take a seat, Brent," said Tom, getting up and helping me onto one of the kitchen chairs, "and I'll tell you the story." "Thank you, because I don't remember anything after leaving the bar, presumably last night, and trying to find my car," I muttered. Tom continued to narrate my story, with Lydia occasionally interjecting comments. In short, Tom and Lydia were planning to meet friends at a restaurant about a block from the bar I left. As they were walking to the restaurant, they saw a guy fall and hit his head on the sidewalk and went to help. When they realized it was me, Lydia went to get their friends. They and their friends helped me into the car and brought me to their house, canceling their dinner plans and ordering takeout with their friends. "I'm very, very grateful to you for helping me," I said. "I'm especially thankful to you for bringing me here instead of to a detox center or hospital." As Lydia brought pancakes and juice to the table, she replied, "Considering what you were muttering, we thought it best just to bring you here. Have some food, you need it." "What did I say?" I asked, completely bewildered. "That can wait until the end of breakfast," Lydia replied, serving me a stack of hot pancakes. During breakfast, the three of us talked about many things, but not about last night. Of course, I asked about Doran, and I was told that she had been married for 3 years but was now divorced and back in the neighborhood, living just 15 kilometers away from them. She was a successful entrepreneur. "Is she still as beautiful as she was in college?" I asked wistfully. "You'll have to judge for yourself." "She'll be here soon," Tom replied. "What?" I exclaimed. "She shouldn't see me like this." "She won't mind," Lydia replied casually. "She's eager to see you, especially if what you muttered last night is true." By the time breakfast was finished and I helped clear the table, the three of us moved to their living room. "What did I say last night?" I asked timidly. "There's no point in telling you everything," Tom said thoughtfully. "Let me just focus on the main points, or rather, the lesser-known ones. Your wife, Melissa, was cheating on you. You wouldn't start a family under such circumstances. You drank hard liquor for the first time in 2 years to drown your sorrows, and you were planning to end your life. Does that sum it up?" "Close enough," Lydia replied, looking puzzled. I covered my face with my hands. After about a minute, I lifted my head. "I'm very, very sorry to burden you with my problems," I said, barely holding back tears. "I really don't know what I'm going to do, but I probably would have ended my life last night if I had been able to reach my car. I think you both know how emotional I am," I continued, choking up. "Sensitivity is a quality I've always admired in you, Brent, but perhaps you're too sensitive for your own good," Lydia said, approaching me and taking my hand. After we talked in general terms for a few more minutes, the front door opened and Doran walked in. Except for a streak of gray in her hair, Doran looked almost the same as the last time I saw her 8 years ago. If anything, she looked slightly better. I was very nervous about how she would react to me. I received the most pleasant surprise of my life. "Hi, Brent," she said with such a joyful voice that it seemed as if my breakup with her 8 years ago had never happened. "You look awful," she giggled, "but I still need your hugs." She reached out her arms, and I took them. She lifted me from the couch and hugged me tightly. After a few seconds of foreboding, I hugged her back, then began to sob. Lydia lightened the mood. "I think you two have some catching up to do. Tom and I are going shopping at the mall and will be back in 2 hours," Lydia said, squeezing my shoulder. I seriously doubted that Tom had planned to go shopping on a Sunday morning, But he pretended it was the most fun activity of his life, and off they went. As soon as they left, Doran got down to business. Brent, you know we've always been honest with each other. Are there any reasons why that should change now? After a short pause, looking into Doran's beautiful brown eyes, I hesitantly said, no. Right now, I really need a friend. Someone I can be honest with. All right, she said with a smile. Let me start. My marriage fell apart because my husband cheated on me. However, I can't blame him too much because I'm sure he felt that there was only one man I ever loved or, more likely, would ever love, and it wasn't him. It was you. According to what my parents tell me, I might have a chance to get you back, and if I do, I intend to make the most of it. I don't think I could have been more stunned if I'd been shocked with a taser. I'm sure my mouth was hanging open and my eyes were as wide as baseballs as I seemed to have lost the power of speech for what felt like ages, all the while staring into Doran's eyes as she looked back at me. Finally, she broke the silence. Was that straightforward enough for you? She asked with a wry smile. Yeah, I'd say that was definitely straightforward, I chuckled. Seems like 8 years ago I made the wrong choice, I continued. That's the right attitude. Now let's deal with this, Doran continued with a wide smile. Let's sit at the kitchen table and make notes about how everything will proceed from here. So, we headed to the kitchen. Doran fetched a notepad with a pen from the living room drawer, and he got down to business. Clearly, last night, in my drunken stupor, I was a complete idiot because Doran seemed to know all the important details of my situation. I just clarified a few things for her. In our discussions, I made it clear that I wanted real revenge on Melissa, regardless of what else we did, and I wanted to be as far away from her as possible. By the time Tom and Lydia returned 2 hours later, bringing us and Doran 2 full carafes of coffee, Doran and I had already established the basic principles of our plan of action. As we devised this plan, I constantly reiterated my need for ultimate revenge and the dissolution of the marriage. She told me she'd do whatever it took to help, as long as I stayed with her, and the ideas flowed freely. Each of us compiled a list of to-dos, a list of things to avoid, and a list of potential serious mistakes. We promised to meet for lunch every other day to touch base and see how we were progressing with our tasks. In reality, we only needed to trust 2 people, Tom and Lydia. Well, perhaps Jasper too. None of us had any issues trusting Tom and Lydia, and it was an honor for them that we confided in them. We told them exactly as much as was necessary. I figured I could trust Jasper too. The most pressing issue was explaining to Melissa why I had been missing since yesterday noon, which was over 24 hours ago. Since I looked dreadful, including a lump and scratches on my head after passing out on the sidewalk, we were confident it was feasible. Doran drove me to where I had left my car. Luckily, it was intact. I had left my cell phone in the car. I checked the messages on my mobile phone. Among them were 10 from Melissa and 1 from her father, Jack. The first, in chronological order, was from Jasper. Hey, Brent, Jasper wrote. Just thought I'd let you know, I saw Melissa. She asked if I'd seen you. I told her you had an emergency situation and were looking for her everywhere, including the training field, but couldn't find her or Jeremy, so you left, instructing me to tell her you'll get in touch as soon as your emergency is resolved and to take a taxi home. She looked very upset, but she completely bought my story. Good luck, man, and let me know if I can help with anything. The messages from Melissa and Jack were roughly similar, with increasing levels of concern about my whereabouts. Doran and I decided that I would call Melissa, tell her I was attacked and taken to the clinic without any documents. That I'd be home in about an hour. I made the call. Melissa's voice sounded anxious as she picked up, yet relieved. I cut the conversation short. Doran and I kissed, not passionately, but not just as good friends, either. I have to remain faithful to Melissa until our plan is realized, I told Doran. But as soon as it happens, I intend to make love to you until the point of complete exhaustion, she said with a smile. Woe is me, I replied dramatically. The only thing that concerns me is whether you'll be able to behave properly with Melissa to avoid arousing her suspicions, Doran said. That's my biggest concern too, I replied, considering how emotional I am. But you've given me the courage to do this because I know there's a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. I'll find a way, I said with a determined expression. Doran smiled, we exchanged one more quick kiss, and I left, first to buy Plan B pills and a disposable phone at the pharmacy, and then home. Melissa and her parents were on the verge of hysteria when I returned home. My appearance gave them no reason to doubt my story about the attack, as my head injury was real, my clothes dirty and disheveled, and my hair tangled. I had hidden my wallet in the car and pretended that I needed to get new credit cards and driver's licenses because they were stolen, although thankfully, my car keys weren't there. Having Melissa's parents present helped. Perhaps I wouldn't have been able to handle it without them there, as seeing Melissa made my anger boil, but I remained relatively calm and played the role of a disoriented victim to the end. Considering her actions on Saturday, I was genuinely surprised that Melissa seemed genuinely concerned about me, and there was no doubt she hadn't slept the previous night. She looked almost as bad as I did. Her parents decided to stay overnight. After Melissa and I took a shower and had dinner cooked by her mother, Carolyn, we disconnected again and fell asleep. I felt shivers down my spine when she laid her head on my shoulder, but I managed it, and within a few minutes, I was in an incredible place. Over the next 3 weeks, things mostly went as Doran and I had planned. Doran, like no one I had ever seen, was diligent in fulfilling her tasks. After 2 lunch meetings with her, I had no doubts that I should have married her, not Melissa. All my previous feelings for her returned with renewed strength, and I was struck by her loyalty, competence, and efficiency. There was much to be done, and it was all challenging. Since interacting with Melissa was difficult for me, I wanted to stick to the schedule despite numerous minor setbacks. To avoid arousing suspicion and to satisfy her heightened libido, I even had sex with Melissa 8 times. Each time, I imagined it was Doran, and the morning after each session, I crushed a Plan B pill and added it to the breakfast, which I, lovingly, prepared for Melissa, watching to ensure she ate it before I left for work. Under no circumstances did I want to have a child with her. It sounds strange, considering how devastated and empty I was when I witnessed Melissa's infidelity, but 3 Saturdays after that terrible event, I hoped Melissa would cheat again. I needed her to cheat to execute my plan. Using the disposable phone I bought along with the Plan B pills, I first called Doran on Saturday morning to make sure everything was going according to plan. And it was. I kissed Melissa for the last time as we parted ways on Saturday morning at the country club. She headed to her golf lesson, and I went swimming. I tracked down Jasper, extracted a promise from him never to tell anyone about what he had told me about Melissa's infidelity or that I had witnessed it 3 weeks earlier, and gave him $10,000 in cash. After waiting another 20 minutes, I surreptitiously removed the "Do Not Disturb" sign from the door of massage room A and ensured that the lock was still broken and that Melissa and Jeremy were inside. Then, I sought assistance from the club's training center director and the head golf pro, supposedly to locate Melissa, desperately telling them, "I have a very urgent situation." I persuaded 2 others to have the head golf pro open the door to massage room A. As expected, there was assistant golf pro Jeremy satisfying Melissa doggy style. I noticed the condom again. "Thank goodness for small favors," the head golf pro exclaimed. "What the hell?" And the training center director gasped loudly. I shouted, "Melissa!" The couple having sex looked at us with utterly dismayed faces. Melissa screamed. Jeremy tried to pull up his pants, which were down around his ankles. I had a completely crazed expression on my face, which was easy to achieve given the circumstances and, of course, required no action on my part, and then I turned and ran, sobbing. The sobbing was feigned, though inside my heart was bleeding. As I left the training area, I heard the head golf pro yelling at Jeremy. I quickly drove home and left a pre-prepared note with my engagement ring on the kitchen table. I also left my regular mobile phone there, as I didn't want to risk being tracked through it. 2 weeks earlier, I had disabled the location detection devices on both my car and laptop. My laptop and a suitcase with the only things I valued, a few souvenirs from my parents, as well as a few changes of underwear and socks, were already in the trunk of my car. My note read, "I loved you more than life itself. I cannot live with your betrayal. God, save my soul." I don't know how Melissa managed to get home so quickly, but she got there before I left. I would have preferred not to meet her, but everything worked out for the best, as my thirst for revenge was partially satisfied. Melissa was truly panicked. She kept grabbing onto me, and I kept breaking free. She tried to catch my eye, but I avoided it. She yelled things like, "I got too excited when I stopped taking the pills. I have a hormonal imbalance. It was just sex. I always made him use a condom. I need to have a child with you. And what will my parents say if you leave?" The only thing I said in response to all her hysterical tirades was a truly emotional response to the last question. "Tell them you killed our love and me." Tears welled in my eyes as I pushed her away and ran out the door. One part of my revenge required me to act on Monday to ensure everything went smoothly, as most institutions cannot reliably confirm money transfers on weekends. Doran booked a hotel room in a busy part of the city under her name, and I parked my car in a remote area of another hotel, about a block away from where we stayed on Saturday and Sunday. Although Doran and I slept together and were tender during the 2 nights spent in the hotel, we did not have sex. I needed to supposedly die before that could happen, but I knew that once it did, it would be incredibly passionate. According to our plan, I changed my appearance as much as possible given the time allotted. Doran cut my hair much shorter than I usually wear it, dyed it a light color, and styled it differently. I wore blue contact lenses to conceal my usually green irises and glasses with simple plastic lenses. I affixed professionally made light-colored mustaches that looked entirely authentic, and I wore clothes bought for me by Doran, which were vastly different from what I usually wore. On Saturdays and Sundays, Doran and I went to the cinema, located next to the hotel. We ordered room service and repeatedly discussed our plans to memorize every detail by heart. On Monday morning, I executed electronic transfers of assets totaling about $12 million from Melissa's trust fund, which I legally fully controlled, to 6 different charitable organizations. Doran and I had obtained all the necessary transfer information electronically for these organizations. 5 transfers went through, but the 6th did not, and there was no time to try to obtain information about another charitable organization, so we had to settle for 5 transfers. One of the 6 charitable funds had been established by Doran several years ago, and she still exercised operational control over it. After we transferred the money and received confirmation that the transfers had been completed, Doran drove me to my car. That's when a serious glitch occurred in our plans. I underestimated the determination and influence of my father-in-law. Apparently, he had practically all law enforcement officers in the city searching for my car because when we reached it, there was a patrol car parked right next to it, with a police officer inside. We needed my car because it had been specially modified to carry out the main part of our plan. We prepared some plans for unforeseen circumstances, including buying a disguise for Doran and a spare costume for me. Resourceful Doran immediately came up with a solution. She changed clothes, ran up to the patrol car, and desperately told the officer, "There's a guy with a gun in the hotel lobby." The police officer immediately radioed and drove from the remote part of the parking lot, where my car was parked, to the main entrance of the hotel. As soon as he was out of sight, I ran to my car, jumped in, and Doran and I headed for a remote coastal mountain road, where I changed the barrier. As I drove to the location of my suicide, with Doran following closely behind, I pressed a button on my laptop, which sent out all the emails we had carefully written over the past 3 weeks. The emails were set up to be sent every few minutes. It took us about an hour to reach the desired location, and by that time, all the emails had been delivered. Doran did a tremendous job composing the emails, still using some of my witty phrases and other letter quirks, so they seemed to come from me but were much more concise and effective. The emails mostly conveyed that I was too weak to endure the betrayal caused by my wife's cheating and apologized for leaving life without bidding farewell in person. They contained statements of pain and torment that I experienced much more effectively than I could express, although these statements accurately reflected my true feelings about 95% of the time. The letter addressed to my father-in-law, Jack, was the most touching. I apologized to him for my overwhelming need for both suicide and revenge, which was so great that I undermined his trust in me, depleting Melissa's trust fund, and hoped that he would eventually find it in himself to forgive me. The location for the suicide was carefully chosen. There was a steep descent from the mountain road to the part of the ocean where there were strong but constantly shifting underwater currents. Anyone but the most resourceful explorer would conclude that no one could survive a fall from the cliff, and that the person's body might never be found, and certainly there was no way to predict exactly where it might end up if not shattered by the waves and rocks or consumed by marine creatures. A few days earlier, I had corroded the bolts with acid in one part of the railing at the suicide site, and then with another material that could mimic natural corrosion. My car had been modified so that when the accelerator shaft was remotely controlled in the engine compartment, it would extend forward, but when it reached the end of its travel, a small explosive device would be triggered, likely destroying it. Doran and I parked our cars on the roadside near the suicide site. We looked through binoculars until we were sure there were no other vehicles in sight. Then I positioned my car facing the railing and about 30 meters from where the railing bolts had been weakened. I activated the remote control to accelerate the car. When my car crashed into the weakened railing, there was just enough inertia for it to break through and fall off the cliff, landing in the ocean 100 meters below. Doran and I also disabled the driver's side airbag in my car and soaked the leather covering of the steering wheel with my blood and tissues, where my head might hit in case of an accident. We also smeared my fresh blood on the leather covering of the steering wheel but soaked it to ensure that some blood would remain in case the ocean waves washed away the fresh blood. The car windows were open, the seatbelt was unfastened, and my wallet lay freely in the car, so at some point, it would surely float to the surface and hopefully be retrieved by divers. As soon as we saw the car plunge into the water, Doran and I got into her car and drove away. That day, we drove 600 kilometers, and the next day, another 600, paying for everything in cash until we reached our destination city, where Doran arranged to obtain the document that would help establish my new identity. For the first 2 days and 3 nights in our initial destination city, we stayed in a hotel room. This time, we didn't just order food to the room. We made passionate love to each other until we were exhausted. I expected my traumatic experience with Melissa to temporarily dampen my sexual abilities. In reality, it was quite the opposite. Much of it had to do with Doran's absolute devotion to me, something she clearly demonstrated by masterminding and executing my escape, and how sexually charged she was. I quickly discovered that Doran had not only improved a bit over the past 8 years but had also become significantly more passionate. So much so that our first time together, I abandoned the usual gentle intimacy, and we gave in to passion until we were completely exhausted. After that, we alternated between tender caresses and wild passion, indulging in carnal pleasures over 2 days and 3 nights more times than I ever thought possible, at least for myself. Before we left our hometown, Doran obtained a certified copy of a birth certificate for a child named Alex Simmons. Alex was born in a rural area with no computer records just a year before me and died shortly after birth. In our initial destination city, using a photo with my new appearance, we acquired a fake Australian passport under the name of Alex Simmons. Doran found out that Australian passports were the easiest to fake, and 2 weeks ago, she found an experienced specialist in our initial destination city. My fake passport was in perfect condition. It even had fake stamps showing trips to Thailand and 2 other Asian countries, a fake stamp indicating entry into the USA a month ago, and a worn appearance. This would readily confirm my story that I was a Native American who had moved to Australia as a child and was now returning. With my new birth certificate and passport in hand, we leisurely drove to our final destination, located on the opposite coast from our hometown. We made it a rule to make love in every state we drove through, even if it was just an hour in a motel. When we arrived at our final destination, we rented an apartment and finally settled on plans to start our new life together. I had already transferred the money I inherited from Brent Willis's offshore account to a new offshore account in the name of Alex Simmons. Using Alex Simmons's birth certificate and Australian passport, I was able to open an account at a US bank and transfer some of the money from the offshore account to it. 6 weeks later, I had a driver's license, credit cards, and all the other usual identity documents. 6 months later, Alex Simmons had an American passport. During our journey, escaping from my former life, we regularly communicated with Doran's parents and also checked online sources for stories about Brent Willis. Things were not going well for Melissa. Within a week after my suicide, my car was lifted from the ocean using a crane barge. Divers found my wallet, and almost everyone I knew was questioned, with my financial documents carefully reviewed. Since 3 weeks before my death, I had received only $30,000 in cash, all from transactions that seemed mostly legitimate, not actual cash transactions, and since there was absolutely no activity in any of my banks, credit cards, or brokerage accounts, it was assumed that I was dead. Soon after, my death was confirmed by forensic examinations of my car. Technical specialists extracted my blood and tissues from the leather steering wheel cover. The intentionally clumsy on my part, disabling of the driver's side airbag in my car, as well as my farewell note to Melissa and the suicide emails to all my acquaintances, left no doubt in the public's mind that I had committed suicide. From what I gathered, the public condemnation of Melissa and Jeremy was extremely harsh. Of course, Jeremy promptly lost his job, and everything indicated that the head specialist of the country club would ensure he never got another job related to golf anywhere in the United States. It was reported that he left town a week after he was caught with Melissa. Melissa was ostracized in high society circles. She even endured humiliation when she was expelled from the country club, although undoubtedly she would have resigned voluntarily. Attempts by local reporters to interview her were unsuccessful, and there were no signs that she ever left the premises, which had previously been our apartment. Unfortunately, the implementation of my plan resulted in Jack and Carolyn, Melissa's parents, suffering. I always knew they liked me, but I never suspected they loved me like a son. One quote from Jack, published in the city's major newspaper, brought me to tears. "Our beloved son is dead, betrayed by his wife. Please respect our privacy and allow us to mourn our terrible loss." Doran and I had just started our new life in our apartment when Tom and Lydia informed us that Jack and Carolyn were planning a memorial service for me. Although it took a long time before I was officially declared deceased, there was no one who didn't believe I had committed suicide. Doran decided to attend the service and flew back to our hometown from our new city. When Doran returned, I realized she was hiding something from me about the ceremony. She tried to brush it off lightly, but I wouldn't tolerate it. A couple of days later, when I pressed her, she tearfully told me how awful it was. People I didn't even know seemed to be deeply affected by me. It was a very solemn event. Jack broke down several times, struggling to deliver the eulogy he was supposed to finish for his brother. Carolyn looked devastated and quietly sobbed throughout the service. There was no sign of Melissa. It was reported she was in a psychiatric clinic. Melissa's family not only made no attempts to reclaim the $10 million I sent to charity from Melissa's trust fund, but also donated an additional $2 million, the amount I had intended to send but couldn't, to another charity organization on my behalf. My memorial service took place 4 years ago. I was officially declared deceased 2 years after that. Doran and I got married as soon as Brent Willis was declared dead. Now we are Mr. and Mrs. Simmons. When we got married, we already had a little girl, and now we have a little boy on the way. Doran and I have no money problems. Besides my inheritance, we have money from the sale of Doran's business to her employees and the salary we receive from the charity organization where we work. Since the charity organization Doran founded received a $2 million donation, they have had enough money to hire her as a permanent operations director and me as a financial director and investment consultant. Thanks to philanthropy, we have been able to help hundreds of low-income families and derive immense satisfaction from our work, including through expanding our activities each year. Tom retired, and he and Lydia moved to a town just 20 kilometers from our house to be close to us, especially to their granddaughter and future grandson. I love Doran more than I ever loved Melissa, and she loves me more than she ever loved Melissa. It makes me feel guilty for not choosing her after college. All this turmoil with Melissa and her family could have been avoided. I stopped trying to find out what happened to Melissa, Jack, and Carolyn. The news was never good and only intensified my sense of guilt. The last thing I heard was that Jack and Carolyn established a scholarship in my name at the college attended by Melissa, Doran, and me. Melissa was released from the psychiatric hospital after 6 months of treatment and left. Doran and I couldn't be happier with each other and our life together, except for one thing. We couldn't feel more guilty than we do about how successfully my revenge was carried out. Now we know that even guilty Melissa, let alone innocent Jack and Carolyn, didn't deserve what we did to them. I wish I wasn't such a cowardly shit, didn't confront Melissa and just divorced her.
Thank you for being with us and listening until the end. If you found it interesting, please subscribe, give us a like, and leave your comments. And we'll see you on the Cheating Secrets channel.